Welcome to Conversations in Education. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Torres Rodriguez, Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools. Today, we present part 2 of our series, Great Schools for All Students, a 4-part series about school district redesign in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford is redesigning its school district, and our series delves into the most crucial guiding principles behind the district models we will be presenting to the Board of Education for their vote. The changes that will be made in our district impact every family and student, our teachers and school staff, our community partners, and our neighborhoods. The guiding principles around which we are redesigning the district include great teaching and learning in every school, expanded family and community partnerships, safe, equitable access to great schools and pathways, and fiscal sustainability. Expanded family and community partnerships means that the lines between our schools and the communities they serve will be blurred. Our schools will become family-friendly hubs of their neighborhoods, and all schools will share district-wide practices that enable our schools to have the capacity to manage and to grow partnerships with parents and community partners, while aligning the needs of their students and families with the available services and volunteers in our community. To discuss expanded family and community partnerships, I welcome our guests, Shantae Brody, Hartford Public Schools parent and member of our Board of Education, Dr. Martin Estey, Executive Director of the Hartford Consortium for Higher Education, and Kimberly D. Oliver, the Director of the Department of Families, Children, Youth, and Recreation for the City of Hartford and member of the Hartford Board of Education. I welcome all of you today.
Thank you.
I'm going to begin, Shantae, by asking you a question. We always want to have the parent perspective, and wondering if you can share with us what you and actually other parents may know that you would want to see change in our schools when you think about deepening relationships with staff and teachers in your child's school so that you and your children can be more engaged.
Happy to be here. So one thing that I think a lot of our school leaders, I don't know that they all know how to. I refuse to think they don't want to. I think if a parent is convinced, and a way to convince parents is by showing them that you want to engage them, that you're not trying to avoid them, that you know, they're coming down the hall and like this parent has a lot of questions for me and is maybe sometimes avoidance. I think that some of our school leaders need help with how to engage the population that they have at their school. Personally, I feel the schools that my children attend, they do a great job, but I think sometimes the time of day doesn't work. Some schools will have opportunity to like have coffee with the principal or the dean, but it's at times that parents who are working is at work. And I know my youngest daughter's school, it may be some stay-at-home moms. We all don't have that luxury. So the time of day when there's morning meetings, even my oldest daughter at the high school level, it'll be a conversation with the counselors, and that'll be like at 10 a.m. So I think sometimes the time of day, and maybe if it could be offered more than once a day, but I'll go back to I refuse that administrators don't want to engage parents. I think sometimes they just don't know how.
So in terms of thinking for us at the district level is identifying ways to build capacity in our school leadership around how to engage in authentic ways. And I'm going to then build off on that and ask Kim, as the director of the Department of Children, Youth, Recreation, right, in the city, you then get an opportunity to engage with a lot of different families, right, throughout the city. And so how does your work cross over into the partnership work in schools? And then what do you then think about what Shantae just referenced in terms of the flexibility that must exist
Definitely, and again, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm very fortunate in the role that I play for the city because we're charged as a department with our young people 0 to 24. So that's a lot. And when we say we want our young people to be successful, we want all aspects of success, right? So academic, but also physical, social, emotional, and also economic success. And so our job at the city is how do we help to facilitate that, or in cases where we need to provide those type of services that make sense for our families and children in Hartford. And we interact with our young people and families at all ages. And I mean, alone in our recreation centers, we're getting over 800,000 visits per year at our recreation centers. So all of those are opportunities and touch points with our families and community residents. So when you talk about family engagement, we talk about it a lot because we talk about the word authenticity and how critically important that is. And also more recently, we've been talking about how do you do it in a way that is two-way, right? So it's not just about us asking a parent, okay, tell us for this moment, just this day, what you're thinking, but how do you actually engage in a relationship and also receiving that feedback, like how can we do better, And I also think about that word co-creation. It's so critically important because as we build the work that we do, we talk about access to resources, and as you talk about like the importance of these hubs throughout our neighborhoods, we want to be a place where you can access resources. And how we're going to do that effectively if we don't know what our families need or what's the best way to get that information, those resources to them. So I completely agree.
Yeah, so now I'm thinking parent and engagement and access at the school level. Now we've expanded to think about accessing those partnerships throughout our city, right?
Yep.
Not only in but beyond school. And so I'm thinking also of the continuum that you referenced. And in that continuum, Martin, right, you have a seat in that continuum, you and who you represent, right, as the executive director of the Consortium for Higher Education. How does your mission improve the pathways of success for our students, and what's the interconnectedness to the family partnership dynamic?
So probably we don't have enough interaction with families as we would like. It's a very hard part of the service. We're dealing with students primarily on the back end of high school, juniors and seniors, who are first generation for the most part. They're recent arrivals to the United States. They're aspirational, and they don't have sufficient guidance in general at home or in the schools to navigate the college application and transition process. So one of our major programs, Career Beginnings, which is at 11 high schools, 7 Hartford public high schools, works with over 250 seniors every year to make sure that they get through the process, that they're not alone in the process, that they have the attention that they need to make that plan to graduate and graduate with a plan, right? So we have a very good success record. Virtually all of them get an acceptance letter, and then there's often difficulties over the summer that we're trying to address, where after they leave high school and there's things they still need to do after they get that acceptance letter to actually matriculate into high school. So we're working on ways to improve the actual matriculation rates, but it's still pretty robust. So that's a major program of the consortium, and obviously the higher ed community is interested in having more students go to college. So.
And so you're talking about access, right? Making sure that all of our students have access, and that happens to be one of the non-negotiables moving forward. At the center of this redesign and restructuring process, we want to make sure that our students have access to high quality teaching and learning experiences that will then, right, result in readiness, college and or career.
Look, actually let me follow up because Hartford district students who go to college, they persist to degrees just as much as anybody else.
Say that again.
That's
a good thing.
Hartford district graduates who go to college, they persist to degrees in comparable to anybody else. Fewer numbers go, but that may be because of externalities that are out of the control. I mean, families might be thinking generationally. They come to the United States it's not your turn, it's your kid. Your kids are going to go to college. You know, that's a time-honored pattern of success in the United States. I mean, easy for me to say, but I mean, there may be things that are getting in the way of college access so that fewer students are deciding to go. It doesn't mean they're not ready to go. It's an important distinction.
So that means that we have to really get to know our families, right? In order to be able to identify, right, what is.
And I wish we could do a better job of that, but we're not quite there.
Well, you know, I think, Shantae, right, a parent perspective, when you hear Martin talk about the fact that different families and different students have different reasons, what then do you think are some of the non-negotiables as we think about redesigning the district, about the partnership resources in schools? What is it that teachers and students need around partnerships?
Speaking of partnership, I had the pleasure of being a substitute teacher, and I say a pleasure, for 4 years. So thinking of being in the classroom, you need support, but you also don't assume that you know of all these things.
Yeah.
So depending on the school that acts, because I'll tell a short, we have a short example. When my daughter was in elementary, my oldest daughter, there was this wonderful, like, 1-week summer program, like at Talcott Mountain. And you're like, wow, like and it was free, but not everybody knew. So if you were, and it didn't have any academic requirements, but the information is given based, I heard someone talking, and I'm like, what's that about? So knowing what's going on and knowing what's available, that's half the battle, because if you know your students, you can give that information to, and it'll be another way to have something to build on with a parent. If you have a student who's just good in science, and you know it's this program, but if you don't, and it just varies. Some people knew and some people didn't. But any opportunity for parents and anyone who works in a school to develop a deeper relationship, those opportunities to me would be a non-negotiable. We have to create opportunities, and we can't, and it can't be a one for all. It might be one service that's provided to parents that is good for some parents, but it's not all. So I think variety is needed in regards to engagement. But I think it's possible.
And so I hear you talk about differentiation, right? And in order for you to differentiate, you have to really know the person, the student, the family really well. And so that gets into recommendations, right? So thank you for making recommendations for us around, I hear, communication. And as I think about Martin, for example, you talked about some of the students that are new arrivals, or students that don't necessarily have either the resources or the structures in our schools or outside of the schools to have that access. What improvements, right, as we think about redesigning, improvements in community partnerships do you recommend for the diverse student population that we have?
So the most important thing for this district is that you stay here. So that's the most important thing. But to answer your question more specifically, I would like to encourage a culture where school-based personnel reach out to the community to express needs that we can then meet. Hartford is asset-rich and communication and coordination poor. So that's your point, right? You got lucky to learn about Talcott Mountain's great program. There are tons of programs like that. So I believe that a strong message from the superintendent and a consistent message that somebody in this building needs to be looking, if you have a need, you want math tutors or reading tutors or FAFSA completion, we don't have the budget for that, but the community is really able and willing to provide that for you. And I will be that person to be that nexus of communication. Kim can be that person. So it's there. It's just that I don't think that school-based personnel are in the habit of looking outside of the building. I know you've heard me say this before, to look for resources.
And you're right, it is a culture shift.
But you need to stay here.
I want to explore that a little more. But it is a culture shift, and I don't only think that it's in a school that it has to happen. I do think it has to happen in schools,
Yeah.
right? That we can, I'm using this term blurring the lines, which can, sound a little scary when you think of blurring the lines. But really what I mean by that is just opening the lines, opening doors for communication, creating structures that facilitate communication in the between teachers, externally with schools, school to school, parent to parent, and then of course agency to agency.
Yeah.
I think now we're in a great place in terms of continuing to cultivate the relationship, for example, between city, your office, the Hartford Public Schools, and others around sharing data and sharing best practices and identifying ways that we can align the resources in the community to our schools, which, by the way, was one of the findings in our comprehensive study that we just discussed with the board around the fact that we are resource rich.
Agreed completely.
Can have an opportunity to improve before us around aligning all of the resources. And so I think about larger scale. Kim, for example, I believe that students, their needs and their strengths should be tended to, met in and out of school.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if there are models out there in other districts, in other states that you might have encountered that do this really, really well. What does that look like?
Yeah, there definitely are across the country. I think of Los Angeles in particular. Flint, Michigan is another example. You have to be very intentional. I think what you said earlier in terms of use words like culture and infrastructure, you have to create a system. What we've created here in Hartford is that we do have a culture of very good people, good-hearted people that will work really hard to build relationships, right? So I'm going to build a great relationship with Martin, and we're going to be awesome. Okay, nobody else outside of me and Martin perhaps, and then if Martin leaves, I'm back at square one. And they're not institutionalized, right? So what these other places have done have created those systems and structures. When we talk about every school should be a community school, well, we really need to unpack that and what that means, right? Because community schools and community school models sometimes are about creating systems and supports for families and children and saying we're all here together, we all have a place at the table, and how do we actually move the dial so that we're doing better by our families and children. When you look at some places like Los Angeles, it's about school is everywhere, in and outside of the building, right? Learning is everywhere. So what we're seeing more and more is you have to be very intentional. I think the word collaboration sometimes can be overused, but this is a place that becomes so important because I think we have to come together and say, what is our common shared agenda and our measurements? And when we're talking about before in terms of like data sharing, we're talking before, okay, I do this as an activity, Martin, you do this, Shantae, you do this. It's like, how are we working together to improve the lives of our students and our families, and can be very specific about the learning piece of it. Because I think that's one thing where we do have all these assets out there, and you have a lot of other partners outside of our school buildings that are trying to be helpful in terms of academic success. So it's like, how do we actually tap into that? And I really look forward to us building those tables and strengthening those relationships.
So I hear systemic protocols, processes, procedures, right? And so that's the culture that we want to change in terms of the infrastructure, the internal way in which we operate, but then externally making sure that we do have a universal shared understanding and commitment about what it is that we are here to do, and that is to serve, right, in the best interest of all of our students in order for them, right, to have the access so that they can be college career ready and ultimately, right, get them back in to our community, right, so that they can contribute to the vitality, right, and sustainability of our community.
So 17% of Hartford residents have college degrees. Hartford Public School graduates, You know, Hartford Public District graduates get degrees about 20–25% of the time every year for each graduating class. So they're not staying. So a policy point is, how do you incentivize people with college degrees to come back into Hartford, particularly those that are homegrown? So that's something that is probably beyond the school district, but it's certainly something that we can think of. If 100 new college degreed students came into Hartford every year to live, it would be a sea change in this city. It's a small city, 135,000 people. You know, I mean, so that's one thing that I would just throw out there.
But you, oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, but it also makes you think about, like, because we talk about it from an economic development perspective and the importance of placemaking. And sometimes people don't think, oh, that's automatically the school should be talking to your economic development, but you should, right? Because we talk about, you're right, it's all about the end of the day. If we want to be a thriving city, we have to have thriving, exactly. And there's some, you know, things that make Hartford very special in terms of the fact that, you know, we are a small city, we have these surrounding towns, and for most of us, we consider that home still, right? But we do have this reality, as you mentioned. It's like, well, that loss is loss of talent. It's lots of people who are able to pay into our tax base, who are able to contribute in other key ways. You know, I look at things like, you know, I'm in recreation, but I look at like our parks, I look about the community building. And I think, you know, we know that it does happen in some ways that we still have those connections. When I think about the faith-based community in particular, where you see people flowing back into the city, but it's not consistently there. If you move out of the city, usually now you have a new community, a new neighborhood that you have to take care of. And how do you balance that with, like, you know,
all of our big efforts are going to help Bloomfield, South Windsor, East Hartford, you know, because you get a degree in Hartford, and what's the first thing you do? You move out of Hartford. So there have to be incentives put into place to bring those people back. You're not getting tax revenue from them anyway, so why not waive it? And you get all the ancillary, you know, benefits. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is.
But we are part of the solution, right? Early on, when you think about this as a continuum, I mean, you know this better, Kim, than anyone, right? Because you have the entire continuum. But we have to start with us, and we then become a foundation. So our foundation, what our students experience each day in our schools, becomes a foundation for the vitality, viability, development of our city.
You have a great foundation, and you don't even know what the success is, because the only thing that you can actually track is test scores, graduation rates, and college going. You don't know what happens to the other students who don't go to college, right? There's no actual way thing in place to track what happens to them. And so, you know, it's seen as a binary. They don't go to college, so it's a failure. And that can't be accurate. So there must be good pathways that they're engaging in that are non-college, but successful. And there's just no way to test that.
Yeah, but I think we have to come together and identify, well, how do you define then success, right, beyond the testing domain?
Right. And nobody has a good method of doing that right now. There's nobody who does.
You know, but it's also making me think about, when I say the word placemaking, how critically important schools are, right, to our community. So if that's a welcoming school, that's an asset, it's an anchor to the community. That experience that, you know, I think about my niece when she goes to school, and we know that most of their day is not actually in the classroom, but man, they actually connect, and so do all of us as her family, their lives and experience to what happens inside that building. And so if we are able to really lift that up, I think we naturally start working on some of these other key strategies as well. But you're right, because there's a lot of people doing some really good work. We have some great entrepreneurs who are out there thinking of the small businesses, and they are raising their hands too and saying, hey, how can we help? And we have to think about innovative ways to make sure that, that we're answering them and bringing them to the table, but also creating a system that they can stay. I'm thinking also, Shantae, what you said about the parents and just something as simple as time of day, right? And you know, depending on when I set up that meeting, really will help to determine who's going to come to that meeting. So being thoughtful about things as small, what seems as small as that, but become really important.
So that lifts for me the notion of customer service.
Right.
I think about that. How often, not often enough, I think, we talk about customer service in what we do. And so from a parent perspective, you know, and as I think of the fact that we're crafting this overarching plan, right, to have schools and neighborhoods, right, have the tightest relationship and partnership. From a customer service perspective, what is the improvement area that you identify for us? What would that look like?
What I found amazing my only child at the time, and when she entered elementary school, and the principal, like, it was like a couple days in, and she's like knew her name. She made it a point that she knew every student's name. That was impressive because it made me think, she really knows these kids. So if she really knows their names, she knows, the perception was that she knows a lot more. So if I walk into a school building and it's warm, like I should be able to feel the love. And it's not just like you're visiting like an office or something. So I think the atmosphere has to be set. But we all know for you to set that atmosphere, it has to be real, and it has to be an atmosphere that's present when parents aren't around even. So it has to be the culture of the building. Like it has to be a norm. And I don't try to be hard on principals, but I just think they have such an important job. Like next to your job, I think it is literally the most important job in a district. And I think we could maybe help, because I'll know a principal from a substitute teacher standpoint. And I'm like, I love them. I love how they include me on things that they didn't have to, things they couldn't pay me for, but they're like, I need you at this meeting. I need you at this training, especially if you're going to be with their students for months. And just to extend that invitation, then a parent will be like, multiple parents be like, I'm not feeling them. And I'm like, what? Like, what is it? Because I think they're awesome. I think they're engaged. They want the students to learn. They have a plan, or they're following the plan. So not that they're a bad person. That's why I said earlier, I don't think they know how. They might be intimidated by what's presented. But I think they could get some help with that, because you're an awesome school leader, but parents don't have that same perception. So I'm like, I think we could help them with that. But I want to walk into a school and feel like they want me here.
Yeah. I had an experience where more recently I was visiting one of our schools. I had a meeting there. But you know, as usual, you go to the front office, right? So I'm signing in, and a parent came in, and I guess it must have been her child's birthday. So let's see the cupcakes and the whole thing. And she initially had to stand there for a bit, you know, and I could tell the frustration was coming up, right? The person was like, oh, well, why are you here? Does the teacher know? And then so she literally said, I should be able to come to my child's school. It's her birthday. I'm bringing cupcakes for the class to celebrate her birthday. Are you trying to tell me I can't come into the school? And then it became this very tense situation that then had to be, you know, brought down a level. But I was watching this play out, and I was like, wow, you know, and I've actually heard that. I've heard parents, like, I'll say, oh my gosh, so-and-so is great, don't you think? And I'll be like, what are you talking about? I can't stand so-and-so. I'm just like, and like you said, I'm almost flabbergasted because I'm thinking about all this work this person is doing to try to really create this great school. And this, the parent will be like, oh no, they're not welcoming of parents. They don't listen. When we reach out to them, they figure we're a problem. And that is a problem. Like, you know, parents should feel very comfortable to go to their child's school. You know, I'm actually an advocate that believes that a school is part of a larger community, and community should be at the school, but definitely the parents. But yeah, I saw this play out, and it just was one of those moments where, you know, that kind of happens, but to see it, it was wow, it was really tough.
And I've dealt with very hard situations at my children's school. It is not, I don't have perfect kids. And when we've had problems, I've been so fortunate to have a team ready to work with me. Because I like to believe, even though I've done a lot of advocacy over the years, I don't be that like I try to lay low, if that's the correct description, at my children's school. I just want to be a normal parent. I'm not, and I think I don't think they've reacted because they think I'm gonna go and report them to someone. I think they generally just have a team ready to tackle, whether it's academics, whether it's emotional, whatever it is. I have had a very good experience throughout, like many schools, and with both of my children. Like, they want to come up with a solution. So I appreciate that. My experience, like in Hartford Public Schools, I can't say anything bad on that regard. But and I think it might be because my kids, all they know, when you're wrong, I'm with the school, like looking at you like, what are we going to do? You have to step it up. But when the school is not right, I'm going to advocate for my kid, but I'm going to do it in a way that the end result is going to be something positive. I'm just not coming up here to fuss and fight to say this is what, no, we have to resolve something. So something like some support around parents around that piece too. I've worked with parents, with some other parents in the community just to do just that. Like, we have to, you want the result is a way that we're going to, you have to meet the school halfway. And that might help, because I don't know the principal's experience and why they are at a certain place. And we might have some principals that no matter what happens, it can just roll off their shoulder and they're still that nice, charming person and warm every time you meet them. But the principals who are not, and then for them to say to their staff, this is the standard, and you see me doing it, and this is what I expect of my staff. So I think it has to be modeled and it has to be real for it to really stick.
So you talk about modeling, which is something that I'm certainly committed to, right? Making sure that in a culture of continuous improvement, which means that we are going to, I use the word dig in. We're going to dig in and we're going to persist in making sure that we improve every single day. But that requires a culture in which, when parents have the experience that you had, right, that there's someone that says, wait a minute, something was not right, right? This was not excellence in customer service, for example.
Yep.
This was not excellence in a welcoming school. So what is it that we have to create as a system, structure, and then culture, system-wide culture, in which it's okay for us to lift, right, those practices that are not in the best interest of our children. And so that takes commitment, right, shared commitment, but it also takes the structures for the community, the parents, our partners, to feel that they're at the table, whether they happen to be there at that time or not, that their voice matters, right along with everyone in the organization.
Right.
So, Martin, I know that, these experiences, right, are almost outside of, when we talk about higher ed, but, as I think about the diverse student needs and that we have, and our parents who don't necessarily know, our new arrivals, right, that they may not necessarily know how to navigate. Any feedback for us in terms of, okay, customer service, parent perspective, staff, right, substitute teacher perspective.
Well, our whole thing is improving post-secondary outcomes, and that usually for us translates into college going, 2 or 4 year college going. So that really is a numbers game with personnel. I mean, it's really about having sufficient people in the building who can give the attention to the students so that they do not feel alone in the process. Because even I sent my daughter graduated from high school last year, and I have every resource to bring to bear of anybody in this community to help her through that process. And it was still agonizing. So if I can't get through this without pain and screaming and yelling and crying, then I don't know who can. So much less a person who's a refugee or a first-generation college goer or has a school counselor who's overwhelmed and dealing with other things. So it really becomes, you know, the difference in the district between those schools that have more than one school counselor and those that have only one. So it's a numbers game. And then we try to fill in, and we would like to do more of it, but it's really not that complicated. Getting a student an acceptance letter to college is not the hard part. That is just a process with attention, and then the hard part is actually getting them from the acceptance letter to matriculation and then success to degree. And that requires something that there's a large gap in the community, which is bridge work from the back end of high school into the front end of college. So that's where I think the work really can be done, and we're trying to do it.
And you referenced the fact that resources are at play, right? Resources in the midst of this entire redesign and restructuring process, we are looking at our resources, our people, our time, and our money.
And you don't have unlimited resources, as you well know, but look who's naturally incentivized to have college-going numbers improve. It's not you, it's the higher ed community, it's me.
Yeah.
So that community needs to be rallied to address this issue, to increase numbers of college-going students, because frankly, it's the morally right thing to do. It's also their business model.
Yeah.
So there's a natural incentive there that creates a natural alliance between the district that wants to improve post-secondary outcomes and the higher education community that wants to receive those students into it. So that's what I've been trying to foster over the last a zillion years.
You're also making me think about, I always talk about meeting our young people where they are, meeting our families where they are, and how do we leverage that, right? So to your point, post-secondary institutions, it's like education institutions, it's like, okay, we want to make sure you actually get into college, you actually go, you know, more than just you were accepted. Well, if you're out in the summer, you're in community, right? Mm-hmm. And you're likely connected to these many community partners, mm-hmm. our different community-based organizations, our faith-based organizations. You're maybe going to the rec center, being part of these programs. And so you have these places where naturally a significant population of our young people are just experiencing and actually located. So how do we tap into those folks as we talk about this partnership piece? Because I think, you know, and this is a new thought, so I hadn't thought about this before, but I'm just sitting here going, if I thought about all the young people, especially our older youth, mm-hmm. we at our recreations, they love evening basketball. Mm-hmm. It's one of our mm-hmm. top things, is evening basketball. And, you know, what are we doing to support that transition? Because we know for our young people and our families, just as human, period, transitions are hard, mm-hmm. right? And what could we be doing that, mind you, may not cost more money? Mm-hmm. So we're not actually talking about the issue of lack of resources. It's you have a captive audience. What are you doing, right? And it's just making me think about these other opportunities that potentially we're missing because we're not having these conversations.
Yeah, I agree completely, Kim. I mean, and the other thing that I think is, so there's opportunity for additional partnerships, right? To help students, even who are not in school right now, to access some sort of post-secondary training, definitely. The other thing is, there's really nothing in place to guide and counsel students who are not college intentional, which is about, on a good year, about 40% of the district who are not going to college. So let's say, make numbers easy, 400 students. And there are lucrative and perfectly reasonable post-secondary tracks that are not higher education, that are not being talked about to the students as they try to exit high school. And it's sort of blasphemy for me as a higher education person to talk about paths that are not college, but realistically meet the student where they are, and plan to graduate, and graduate with a plan that is on a track to material self-sufficiency. So what are those tracks? You know, you don't need a college degree to go into all the allied health careers. You don't need a college degree to go into coding. You don't need a college degree to go into manufacturing. Okay, these are all lucrative things. You're going to get to college eventually if you choose any of those. But where's that? I'd like to build a network of supports that provides opportunities or information to school counselors so that they can talk intelligently about that. But you run up against a kind of a political barrier there, which is, why are you telling my kid he shouldn't go to college?
I see.
Right? So that becomes, we've talked about that many times.
About this, and it's like, because we created this or conversation, and right, someone else always like, this is an and conversation, right? Because it should, I think every single one of our students should graduate and be able to make the choice that's best for them, right?
And go to college if they want to.
Exactly.
Right, but maybe they don't want to.
Exactly, and be informed enough to make that decision. So, because that should be an informed decision moment, right? Not just that it's passing you by. But what happens many times, we go like career or college, and we all know the importance of lifelong learning. We all know the importance of, you do need to learn after high school. It continues, no matter what you're doing, it's going to continue. But we do sometimes approach it as if it's one versus the other.
It's a binary. It's college or retail.
Yeah, exactly.
And that
and
is just
so many other options.
A false dilemma.
So partnerships in general. We talked about partnerships at the school level, right? At the most intimate, if you will, right? Parent to teacher, parent to administrator, and then we talk about partnerships. Your office, your department, the city with the school system, and or right, making sure that our students have access to college evening basketball, for example. And then we talked about partnerships that allow and facilitate resources for our staff, for example, our counselors, right, to know all of the information available so that they can connect with our students. So when I think about all of these elements, moving forward as we recreate, restructure who we are as a district, knowing that we have a commitment, that one of the guiding principles is around this expansion of the partnerships, then we have to create the conditions, right, to make sure that not only are they in place, that we can sustain them moving forward. So thank you all for being here today and really informing our thinking. I think all of us have a role, a seat at the table in terms of our restructuring, whether, is your role as a parent, as a board member, or, as a partnership. And I'll be with you, in the consortium tomorrow, having conversations as to how we can partner. So I thank you all, and I look forward to how it is that we collectively redesign our district. I urge you to participate in the restructuring of our school district also by visiting our website at www.hartfordschools.org so that you can learn more about the events that you can attend and ways you can share your voice. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next 2 parts of our series, Great Schools for All of Our Students.